She said it so casually as if she were commenting on the weather or reminding me to take my vitamins. Carter laughed. One of those soft chuckles meant to smooth over the sting and pass her the garlic knots without looking at me. I nodded like I agreed, pushed half the slice aside, and chewed what remained in silence. The crust went down dry. I'd been living in their home for 6 weeks. 6 long, stiff weeks. At first, I thought I was imagining it the way they checked the thermostat after I walked through the hallway. How Noel would glance at the grocery receipts and sigh a little louder when there were extra items. It was a quiet tightening, like slowly cinching a belt without saying a word. They gave me the laundry room to sleep in, just for now, she had said. A twin mattress with no frame tucked next to the stacked washer-dryer. No window, no table, one outlet. I folded my clothes in the dark and wrote grocery lists by flashlight when I couldn't sleep. The worst part wasn't the space or the cold or even the ache in my hips after folding clothes on the floor for too long. It was that every kindness came with a condition. Every gesture carried a weight. That night I sat at the edge of the mattress holding my knees and tried to remember the last time someone had looked at me with real softness. Before all this, before laundry rooms and whispered judgments over dinner, I had a life that was mine. After Lel passed, I stayed in our place in rural Oregon, a weathered little farmhouse that leaned with the wind and creaked like an old friend. People kept asking if I'd sell it, move to town, be closer to stores to help. But I had everything I needed. A rusted red truck that still turned over on cold mornings, 3 goats that knew the sound of my boots, and a porch where I drank my coffee in the quiet. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Not to the neighbors, not to my daughter. I just didn't see the sense in leaving a place that still remembered me. Lel had built the back fence with his own hands. His initials were carved into the barn beam, LR, barely visible now under years of dust and sun. I'd sit there sometimes in the hay, let the goats nudge at my sleeves and just breathe. When the roof started leaking 2 winters ago, I didn't call anyone. I climbed up there myself with a tarp, a hammer, and more knee pain than I cared to admit. I remember sitting cross-legged by the chimney, the clouds hanging low, and telling myself I'd get down before the rain started. It started early. I finished anyway. I was soaked through, but the leak was sealed. At night, I would light the old wood stove and make stew with whatever I had in the cupboard. Sometimes just potatoes and onions. I kept a notebook by the window where I wrote small things I wanted to remember. I wrote down the names of birds. I wrote down how many eggs the hens gave. I wrote a dream I had about Lel once he was driving the truck, and I was riding with my feet up on the dash, like I used to when we were young. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a life I understood. It had a rhythm. Things broke, and I fixed them. Fences sagged, and I straightened them. Nothing asked more of me than I could give. No one looked at me like I owed them something just for existing. Then one day I looked out across the field and saw Noel's car coming up the gravel road. I was pulling weeds near the porch steps when I heard the tires crunching up the gravel. Noel hadn't been out since the summer before. I brushed the dirt off my jeans and shaded my eyes as she stepped out of the sleek black car I'd only seen in photos. She wore a pale blouse, slacks that didn't dare wrinkle, and sunglasses too big for her face. "Mom," she said, smiling like she had something hard tucked behind her teeth. "You look sturdy." She stayed for 2 hours, asked how I was managing, commented on the slope of the porch, brought up an article she'd read on fall injuries in older women. I poured her iced tea. She barely touched it. "I just worry," she said, placing a hand over mine. "It's not safe out here. If you fell, who would know?" What if something happened at night? I told her I'd be fine. I always had been. She smiled again, soft and wide. "That's exactly why you shouldn't have to be. Carter and I were talking. We'd love for you to come live with us. The guest room is sunny, and Lucia would adore having you around." She mentioned a school nearby Park's farmers markets. "It's not charity. Mom, it's family." Then came the second smile, the quieter one. "There's just one thing. We're looking at expanding the business. Nothing risky. If we use this property as collateral just for the loan application, it would speed everything up. You'd still own it, of course, It's just paperwork. I stared down at the forms she had printed, crisp and clipped together in a plastic folder. Her pen was already uncapped, resting beside them, like it had been waiting for me to agree. I wouldn't ask, she added, lowering her voice, if I didn't think it helped us both. I signed not because I was convinced, not because I didn't feel the shift in my gut. I signed because I wanted to believe her. And 2 weeks later, I was standing in her kitchen wearing the same sweater I'd packed in a rush, unsure where to hang it. The house in Washington looked like something from a magazine. Cream siding, wide steps, hedges trimmed to an identical height. Inside, everything gleamed: white countertops, silver appliances, a light scent of lemon polish in the air. Noel called it open concept. To me, it just felt hollow. She gave me a tour that first day. Her voice was clipped efficient, pointing out drawers I shouldn't use, doors that stuck, cabinets that were child-locked for safety. Upstairs was their space, she said. Bedrooms, offices. Downstairs had the kitchen playroom, and tucked behind the garage, the laundry room that would be mine just until we get the guest room ready. They'd cleared space beside the washer-dryer for a mattress. A small table lamp sat on a plastic crate. Plenty of outlets, Noel said, as if that made up for the lack of windows. I nodded, placed my overnight bag on the floor, and smiled. The next morning, I found a paper on the kitchen island with my name in block letters. Just a routine, Noel said, handing me a coffee already poured into a travel mug. To help you feel settled, useful. The list was color-coded: breakfast prep, light cleaning, folding laundry, unloading the dishwasher, meal prep before 5 p.m. Ill weekends, she added. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why a house with 2 able-bodied adults needed a schedule for a 72-year-old woman. I just folded the paper and placed it in the drawer by the stove. At dinner, the portions were plated before I sat down. Lucia, their daughter, had more on her plate than I did. When I reached for seconds, Carter cleared his throat. That should be enough, right? He said, smiling. The heat in the house dropped 2 degrees after 8. Just being mindful of the bills, Noel explained, adjusting the thermostat password from her phone. I began to notice the corrections. We don't put that pan in the dishwasher, Mom. That's not where we keep the cereal. Lucia doesn't like the smell of bleach. Could you use the other detergent? I said yes to everything. Smiled at everything. Let my body adjust to cold tile floors and quiet expectations. I folded laundry to fill the silence and peeled vegetables until my hands cramped. One night, I knocked over a bottle of detergent while trying to lift the laundry basket. The pizza box was already open when I came in from setting out the recycling. The kitchen smelled of pepperoni and garlic, the kind of smell that used to fill our farmhouse during football games or when LOL invited the neighbors over to play cards. Lucia was on the floor coloring beside the kitchen island, and Carter was pouring soda into glasses. Noel handed me a plate without looking up from her phone. We sat around the dining table, Lucia humming, Carter scrolling through headlines. Noel biting her cuticle, distracted. I took a seat at the far end and reached for a slice. It was greasy and already cooling, but I hadn't eaten since breakfast. Carter looked up just as I lifted it to my mouth. Hey now, he said, grinning. This isn't your cornbread from the farm, Marlene. Eat light. This stuff's expensive. Noel let out a soft laugh, almost reflexive. Lucia giggled too, though she didn't understand. My hand froze mid-air crust halfway to my lips. I smiled. Or at least I shaped my mouth into something that resembled one. I placed the slice back on the plate. Of course, I said. Didn't mean to overdo it. No one replied. Carter turned back to his screen. Noel passed Lucia a napkin. The moment slid away like it hadn't happened, but something in me refused to follow. I chewed through half the slice anyway, tasting nothing, while my eyes stayed fixed on the window above the sink. The lights reflected the scene like a photograph, each of us in our place, still, silent, set. Later that night, I folded the paper schedule one more time and tucked it between my mattress and the floor. That night, I lay on the mattress in the laundry room, the hum of the dryer, long gone, replaced by the low whine of the water heater, ticking beside me. I stared at the ceiling, hands crossed over my stomach like something was being buried. I reached under the mattress and pulled out my notebook, the one I kept hidden under the old cleaning chart. I wrote 3 lines slowly, deliberately. Eat less, speak less, be less. Then I closed the notebook and placed it back beneath the mattress almost gently, like I was saying goodbye. At 4:10 a.m., I slipped out from under the covers. I didn't turn on a light. I knew the shape of the room in darkness better than daylight. I put on 2 sweaters, wrapped Leal's flannel around my shoulders, and folded my few clothes into a canvas bag. My boots were stiff from disuse, but still laced up without protest. The kitchen was dark. I didn't pause. I passed through the hallway past the glow of the thermostat screen, past the stillness of a house not meant to shelter me. Out in the yard, the grass was damp with cold. My breath made clouds that hung in front of my face, trailing behind me like something reluctant to let go. The back fence wasn't tall, but my knee made it feel like a mountain. I gripped the top rail and swung my leg over. My boot caught. I fell hard, palms scraped. My right knee hit the gravel bone to stone. I let out a sound but bit it back before it grew teeth. I sat there for a moment, the cold sinking through my coat. Then I stood slowly and kept walking. The sky was still black, but the horizon had the faintest line of gray. I didn't know what direction I was heading, only that I wasn't going back. A few blocks later, I passed a streetlight that buzzed overhead. Beneath it stood a woman wrapped in a red coat, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other. She saw me before I saw her. Under the buzzing streetlight, she stood still like she was waiting for the dark to blink. I slowed, half ready to cross the street, but she tilted her head and gave the smallest nod. Not curious, not afraid. Just there. "You out early," she said, not as a question, more like an observation. I nodded. Couldn't sleep. She squinted at me, then looked down at my scuffed hands. "Did the ground win a little?" I said, but I kept walking. She smiled. "That's usually the trick." She tore a piece of her sandwich and handed it to me. I didn't take it at first. She waited. "It's peanut butter. Nothing fancy." I took it and chewed slowly, not because I was hungry, but because someone offered it like I mattered. Her name was June 76th, widow, retired school librarian. She lived in a nearby complex that offered senior rent discounts if you don't cause noise and you pay on time. She said it like it was a badge of honor. We walked in silence to her place 2 blocks, right at a stop sign, then into a squat building with blue trim and worn stairs. Inside, the hallway smelled like toast and cleaning spray. Her apartment was clean but lived in thin curtains, hand-me-down furniture. A chipped mug collection by the sink. She poured tea. Cinnamon steeped too long. No milk. I sat stiff on her couch, unsure where to put my bag. "You running from something?" she asked after a long while. "Someone," I said. "My daughter." She nodded like that made perfect sense. "You can sleep on the couch if you want," she said. "No judgment, just until you figure things out." I looked around the room at the crochet blanket folded neatly on the armrest, at the small heater clicking in the corner, at the chipped photo frame of a man who looked like he'd laughed a lot when he was alive. "Thank you," I whispered. She got up, pulled the blanket over my legs, like she'd done it 100 times, and turned off the light. The couch creaked as I lay back, and for the first time in months, I let myself exhale without flinching. The next afternoon, June made grilled cheese and poured 2 glasses of orange soda. We were halfway through when someone knocked. She opened the door without asking who it was. "This is Caleb," she said, motioning him in. "He helps folks like us untangle things." He looked young, maybe early 20s, with a laptop bag slung over his shoulder and a kindness in his eyes that didn't feel rehearsed. June handed him a sandwich before he even sat down. We talked for a while about nothing. The weather, the price of eggs, how TV got worse every year. Then he glanced at me. Serious now. "June told me a little. You gave your daughter permission to use your house for a loan." I nodded. "She said it was just paperwork." I signed what she brought. "Did you have a lawyer review it with you?" "No," I said. "She said I didn't need one, that it was still mine." Caleb leaned back in the chair and rubbed his hands together, once slow. "That's not just careless, Mrs. Marlene. That's a problem, and not just a moral one. It's legal. What happened to you if you signed under pressure without independent advice? It's considered elder financial abuse." I blinked at him. The words felt too big to sit still. "You don't have to let it stand," he said gently. You can fight this. I sat there, fingers tightening around the edge of the plate, half a crust still untouched. Something stirred in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not fear, recognition. He asked if I still had any of the documents. I told him yes. And 2 days later, I was sitting across from a lawyer in a cramped office above a laundromat, telling her everything. The courtroom wasn't what I expected. No marble, no drama, just worn carpet, beige walls, and a tired ceiling fan that whirred louder than it turned. I sat beside Evelyn, my attorney, her file folder thick with copies of documents I'd once signed without reading. Caleb was behind us, quiet but steady, like a stone at my back. Noel arrived just before the hearing began. She wore a gray suit, hairpin, tight lips pressed into a colorless line. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer, a man with a voice too smooth to trust, spoke first. He called it a misunderstanding, said I had agreed willingly, said my age didn't make me incapable of making financial decisions. He smiled too much. Then Evelyn stood. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the room like frost. She outlined the facts. No independent counsel, no clarity of terms. Living conditions that shifted from temporary to exploitative. She quoted the law without raising her voice once. Then she looked at me and nodded. I stood slowly. My knees popped like they always did. I didn't have a speech. I didn't need one. I raised a daughter, I said, not a debt collector. That was all. The judge, a woman with a pen tucked behind her ear and eyes that had seen too much, took a long pause before she spoke. Then with no ceremony, she nullified the mortgage. My property would be restored. Noel would be required to pay back a portion of what she'd borrowed. She would also attend financial ethics counseling and mediation for elder family abuse. The gavel struck once. Noel didn't speak to me as she left. Carter wasn't there. Neither was Lucia. Just silence where a family should have been, but I didn't feel empty. I felt like someone who'd been underwater too long and finally broke the surface. My hands trembled as I picked up the copy of the ruling. Evelyn touched my shoulder and said, "You did what many wouldn't dare." Outside the building, the air felt too bright for the moment. I stood for a long time on the sidewalk, paper in hand, until Caleb asked if I wanted a ride back to Jun's. I told him no. I had one more stop to make before I could go home. The gate creaked just like it always had. The gravel shifted beneath my boots in a way my feet still remembered. The porch leaned a little more than before, but it was mine. The grass had grown long, wild at the edges, like it had been waiting for someone to tell it where to stop. I spent the first few days in silence, moving through rooms like I was waking them up. I dusted picture frames, opened all the windows, let the light pour in. I lit the stove with hands that hadn't forgotten. The first night I slept with the window cracked, letting the sounds of the field hum me to sleep. June arrived a week later with her 2 suitcases and a jar of homemade jam. We painted the porch rails together, laughed over burnt biscuits, and argued about radio stations. She took the front bedroom. I kept the one with the creaky floorboard because I liked the way it groaned when I stepped out of bed. Evenings became our ritual. 2 mugs, 1 old blanket between us, the radio low and scratchy with songs from when our hands were younger. We didn't talk much on the porch. We didn't need to. The sign on the front door used to read, "Lel and Marlene." I took it down the second week, hung up a new one. And I carved myself rough but honest. This house belongs to someone who remembers her own worth. I stood back and smiled at how well it fit. Love without respect is not love. It took me too long to learn that aging doesn't shrink you. It sharpens what's true, strips away what never was. I gave everything I had to my family, thinking that was what mothers were meant to do. But when giving turned into erasing, I had to choose myself. If someone needs you small to feel big, that isn't love. That's control. So I walked, I climbed, I fell, and I kept walking. And now with both feet back on my own porch,